Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of Voice of the Rings, and this is a Lord of the Rings RiseToWar Legacy today, my friends playlist. And we have a guest with us today, Jethros, and we're going to talk about the commander Falgin. Alright, one of the made-up dwarves for RiseToWar, but he's a very, very cool hero, and basically we're going to just tell you guys today about a couple different builds and ideas, really how you should probably build him and use him. Again, I really highly recommend, and I'm sure Jethros agrees, do test your own builds, you guys. Like, I know a lot of you are here like, what's the build to use? But we'll give you some of those, but at the same time, it's good to test your own stuff and see what you like. And Jethros will also talk about in a minute how really it is very, very important to have the right gear depending on what kind of build you're using with your hero of any commander, but especially here with Falgin. So, alright, the most generic build right off the bat for Falgin is really the units you want to have with Falgin are dwarves, okay, you guys? So here's the reason why, real quick. So at his Eredluin Expedition, which is his ability here in his rank 1 tree, is a one that all allies get reduced physical damage for each dwarf unit present, right? Dwarf unit, if you hover it, it shows you which dwarfs, if you click on it, right, what dwarves you need. Any of these, as long as you have a combination of any 3 of these units, they're going to get that stacking 0.4 reduction each point times 3, right? Because for every, you can have up to 3 groups. So I do highly recommend have all 3 groups with Falgin. Don't do a group thing where you only have 2, if you're going to use that part of the tree, mind you, if you're going to use this one. And then also, of course, this one's just amazing, right? Formation. His melee units to get reduced damage and his range get more damage. Just absolutely amazing. And then he's got well prepared. So I do highly recommend you give him some kind of melee front units. Now you probably want to have axe throwers with him too end game because it adds a lot of damage to your build. But I would recommend having ram riders or guardians, or if you're the dwarves and you can get those iron guard, whew, those are awesome. But again, at counterattack, it gives counterattacks. After taking damage, they deal a little bit of damage back to the opponent. Very cool, very cool. So, and then of course, you can never go wrong with Musician. Like this ability on the dwarves, buffs your whole army, and then you get your huge heal again if you have whoever's your highest defender, probably your guardians, unless you have the iron guys. They're gonna get a big heal. Again, focus helps this guy a lot. Level-headed. And then, that's if you're rank 1. Now, if you're rank 5, you definitely want to think about doing Thrain's Guards. Alright, guys? Because again, this is the first 6 instances of damage. They get a huge reduction, and the allied damage of those dwarves goes up. Again, and it's affected by might, which is really, really cool. But again, this is really good why a lot of people will use their dwarf axe throwers with him, because that adds a lot of damage. Because guardians are very tanky, and they do decent damage, but they're not like damage dealers. They're damage takers. So, but if you have those iron guard, man, whew, they're really, really good with him. They also have defense. He has defense stance, which is good. Again, affected by might, which is fantastic. Deals extra damage in 1 ally melee unit. Next damage, they get a damage reduction for your allied unit, your melee unit, and he does some damage, which is cool. And again, he has parry, which your army damage from melee units, your whole army takes less damage from any melee unit on the enemy side by a certain percent. Again, this is 2 times 7, so you get a decent little increase there. So very, very good. That's a good build. And by the way, in the bottom right corner of any commander, this is really important for you to know, you can always click on that little book down there, right? And they show the top popular builds. So as you can see, there's exactly what I was just talking about. This guy has set up already. So you can see he's a rank 10, he's level 49. He's probably in a different campaign than us, because I don't know if anyone would be there at this point in the game. But he has axe throwers, guardians, and look at that. He's got the iron warriors like we were talking about. And look at his build. He's got 15 points in Thrain's Guard. He's got 2 points in defense stance. He's got 7 in the reduction from melee units for his army. He's got the physical damage reduction for dwarves. He also has the counter in there. He's got, and then all the rest of his points in formation. And he's got points to buff his army here, +3 attack, right, musician, and he's got 1 point in a little removal thing. Now again, he's only respect 10. If you had some Falgin that was respect 15 or 20, and you could do a lot more, obviously, correct? But anyway, it is a really good buff build. So that is the way to build him. And one other thing that I mentioned before we go into it any farther is you have to realize and think about his awesome, amazing item for respect 10 if you do have him that high respect, obviously. If you go in here and you look at his item, which I'm getting close, it's really, really strong. Even just the base level 1 before refining it. So all melee units get a damage reduction, and it says all range units get a certain damage buff. And this is for every type of dwarf use present. It works the same way as his other ability, right? His expedition ability. So Really, really, and look at these buffs at level 1, just without even upgrading it. The whole army gets HP. Army defense goes up by 10. Army's HP for dwarves and defense is even better. Again, why you want to focus on just using dwarves with Falgin. He's a dwarf leader. You could try other builds, but it's not going to be nearly as good as using dwarves.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Being distracted, I understand that. I get my dog hitting my door all the time. That's distracting for me. All right. So, I will continue on, and we're going to ask Jethros a question here in a second about something. So, Jethros, items. We're going to go into items with Falgin now. When it comes to items, with his other build, right, with his build that we were talking about, what do people want to use his damage build, which I have seen people using, which means he goes into Durin's Blood. And he does have some attack abilities, right? Like he has in here, he's got his defense stance hit and things like that. Again, he is more of a support hero, but if you were going to use Durin's Blood, what kind of weapons probably should we be looking for? Probably more might-based damage and damage-dealing weapons. I'm trying to think with items here off the top of my head. What if people were using just purple items? I mean, they probably want to use things like Battle Axe, right? And the hammer. The dwarf hammer is probably the ideal weapon for him, though, because it gives him so much might, and he's also giving more defense to his dwarves and allied damage defense as well. So it's pretty... He's kind of a straightforward commander, huh? He's really a pretty straightforward commander.
Well, yeah, I would say my recommendation for sure would be more based off, depending how good your gear is, you should maybe consider building him differently. So I think if you are going to use purple gear on him, you're better just doing his army-focused builds and doing things that buff his army's defense or damage and general tankiness with your purple things, purple items. He does scale quite a bit with might, though, especially if you did want to take some of his damage tree. Then I would say if you're going to go that route of taking his Durin Blood, you know, and then maybe taking Thrain's Guards because it scales with the effect scales with might, and then the defensive stance scales with might. So I think that if you can get really high might with really good like gold gear with still a little bit, like any of the gold items that are good for dwarves are great on him because they give so many stats to the army inherently. And they focus almost entirely on might. And so you'll benefit a lot from that if you do a build that's focused more on might, which you're probably going to get the most out of it if you have like really high gold gear. If you're going to go for purple, then I would recommend the build that you were originally talking about, which mostly focuses on the R0 tree and the R5 tree mixed together, and don't really worry about him doing damage himself too much.
Yeah, you're going to be more focusing on that damage that the reflection is going to do and the axe throwers are going to do.
Yeah, so I'd say, like, you know, what you were saying, that Arid Luin Expedition and Thrain's Guards would probably be fine.
Especially if they don't have high respect, but they do have him 5. They probably want to do these two. Probably only a few points into this, even though this is so powerful.
Yeah, I would put a couple points in to get relief, because relief is just so good for having a cleanse, especially in PvP.
Yes,
And also, relief actually just scales pretty well with any focus at all, even though he doesn't have a lot of focus. The fact that it has such good scaling on it is useful to know.
It is interesting that he gets plus 15 focus when he max levels Thrain's Guard, which does help that ability, which is kind of an interesting little side note, right? I always thought that was interesting how they do this. Like, Erluin gives plus 15 speed, plus 15 focus, right? 15 might for Durin's Blood. Yeah. So again, a damage build if you're doing Thrain, which might, again, Durin's Blood is good maxed because it's going to increase that, right? Because he could buff his units and then also get increased might from that other one. I always find these interesting how the max levels are usually opposite from the trees. So they're trying to encourage you to, like, build into a different tree, right? They're like, oh, well, if they want extra might, they should probably do Durin's Blood with Thrain's Guard, right? For those, because it's affected by might or damage reduction from that. Though 15 might isn't end of the world. I know that, but it's still, I think that's interesting as a side note. You know what? One thing that I think would be really good, Jethros, if you could walk people through is, let's say they're doing this, taking tiles versus fighting PvP. What do you think would be the best setup for, like, early taking tiles? Because Falgin actually is pretty good at taking tiles. Not as good as other, like, but he's mid-ground from what I've experienced using him myself. He doesn't lose a ton of troops because he has the musician, but he's also not like quite as efficient as like Thorin or Gandalf the Grey because he doesn't have like stuns himself to stun the tile armies. But what do you think would be the best setup? Let's say you're respect 1 with, or let's say you're respect 5. We'll say that. And then what do you think the best setup would be for doing tile taking out of these trees?
Well, it depends on what level of tile that we're talking about, because I think early game musician is actually the tree, not just that ability itself, but the actual tree is very good.
Yeah.
Because you can get points into relief and level-headed and heal up your army pretty much no problem. The issue is you're not going to get very much damage, so you might draw a little bit. So you can consider doing one of the other trees, but as far as survivability goes, in the early game when you're just leveling characters, you don't want to lose troops. The musician tree is probably one of the best. And then from there, I would probably put the points into Thrain's guards.
Yeah,
I think that's really good to use together.
I agree,
again, if you do have really good might, weapons and stuff like that, you still can do Durin's Blood. But the issue with that is that you're probably going to take a few more losses because you're missing out on resistances. Because Thrain's guards and parry are going to give you good survivability against units.
And not just that, I mean, they actually do increase the damage your troops are going to use. But now
that's also going to do that as well.
Yeah, and on a side note for people, you do have to think about the fact, are you going to have dwarf units early, right? So if you're doing the normal game mode and you're not the faction of Erebor, that's an issue. Because the musician would still help you if you just had him high level. But like you wouldn't really be able to use this effectively, either of these, because they're for dwarves. So let's say you don't have access to dwarves yet, and you really don't want to waste points putting into these that only work for dwarves. I think I would recommend, I don't know if you agree with me, then do the musician like Jethros said, which is the most important. And then if you have Durin's Blood, maybe just make it where he does damage. If he's like your only character you've put a lot of work into, again, at that point you might want to be using a different character to get tiles early. But of course, on a side note,
it's just fine.
Yeah, yes.
For taking tiles early.
Yes, he is good. Musician alone is probably beautiful. But the new game mode that we're playing right now, right, the Rings of Power one, it does let us get dwarves rather early, which is kind of cool. Because you can hire units that aren't...
I would say by the time you get musician kind of maxed out, you're probably already going to have access to dwarven units.
True. Yeah.
So then you can start doing Thrain's guards next. In most cases, I mean, if you have them respect 25, then you're just going to get that tree filled out at the start. But
yes,
for the average person that has them between respect 5, maybe who's thinking about using him up to as high as respect 10, I would say that they probably aren't going to be putting points into Thrain's guard until like when they start having access to dwarves. But it does depend in other game modes, which like faction you start as, because that's going to affect when you get access to dwarves. Because sometimes you'll get dwarves really late. Like you might have your characters like as high as like level 30, 35 before you have access to all the dwarven units.
Final level dwarves, level 3. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. So I think the answer to people is yes, he can take tiles. I think he takes tiles more efficiently than, like, for example, let's say a warrior like Gimli. Gimli has a healing in his tree, but I found the best for me early is usually to do damage with him. But what I actually do is I usually use a different character, and then I, do mock battles with Gimli to get him up, or mind training, as they're called.
Yeah, your Gimli has a lot of might and a lot of weapons, so... I think that probably unless they have a Gimli that's respect 14 and has a bunch of fully refined gold gear, that probably the healing tree would still be better in most cases.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So definitely musician, I agree with Jethros totally. Like, this is the big one for taking tiles. And then to finish up our video, what do you think for PvP? I mean, still the cleanse is good, but I almost think what this guy's showing here is probably a pretty decent PvP build. Like right off the top. But
yeah, it's pretty good. I somewhat disagree with having the 15 points into the, what do you call it?
Expedition?
No, the musician. Yeah.
Oh, the musician.
There's 15 points in that when you only have 1 point in relief. So I mean, it's decent to give defense, but you already have so much defense. There's always going to be diminishing returns. And so there's that. But the 3 attack is decent. But I think if you look at the armor that they already have a lot of things to
Yeah,
help give
defense.
HP and attack.
Yeah, look at that. And then he has 3 points. He hasn't refined it, but he has 3 points. And this item alone gives 20 defense.
A lot of defense.
Plus
it gives 30.
Oh, 30, excuse me. Yeah,
Yeah.
And 4 HP. Yeah, you're right. I think at that point this is like overkill. I think it probably for PvPing, so you don't draw or get wipes as hard. Is that I don't if you agree with me, but I think that probably Durin's Blood would be a better to have more damage if they have the points. If they can max out the Expedition and Thrain's Guard, I think that I think it'd be better almost to have this. Maybe 2 points in Musician, 1 point in the removal, right? Wait, is it
the level-headed?
Removes 1 debuff,
and that works on every unit you have.
Yes,
so you can have 3 unit types and it'll help all of them.
So like 3 points in this, 1 point in that, and then maybe the rest if they've maxed out Expedition and Thrains. Let's say this is someone that has really high respect right on their character, I would say just put points in Durin's Blood at that point.
I don't even know if I think it's worth putting points into well prepared or the firing squad or firing formation.
Wait, those ones.
That one.
Okay.
That one's decent, but it's not as good as it seems just because the value is only about 10% when max.
Okay.
A lot of other things give you better value.
Okay. So then let's ask this one more question for people who are watching. Thrain's Guard then probably max, right? You want that max 15.
Yeah.
And then defensive stance, if it's far in the game, he's max level, probably max, right?
Yeah, I would do that especially if you're going to go into Durin's Blood, since you're going to get extra skill damage anyway.
So let's say they max Durin's Blood, max Thrain's Guard, have defensive stance full. Obviously, Whirlwind and All In should be probably full. And then what do you think about parry? If they just take less damage?
I think that one's good, but depending if you have enough points to put 15 into Arid Loon Expedition, I would probably do that before even putting points into like Whirlwind.
Oh, okay. So
I think I would put the points in All In.
But
the problem is you have to skill them properly so that you have Whirlwind before All In.
Correct, which we should mention in this video, that you always want to put, if you're going to use All In, you got to put your last point into that being 1 point, right, for each one. So if you're going to do it, let's say we'd put 1 point into, here, I'll show you right now. If you're going to do, let's say, I'm just going to get them where they're open. Whatever is a physical, yes, you're going to want defensive stance first, 1 point, then 1 point in a Whirlwind. Then if you're going to use, this is another active ability, All In should always be last, because if it lands on the same round, it will activate last if you put the last point into it right here. Now you can do whatever you want. Now you put the last point, the last point into All In, now you can say, oh, I want more points into the defensive stance, more points into Whirlwind, and then you can max that All In too if you want. You can max it out right now, All In, if you want, but you have to put your first point into the ones that are active before All In, right? I say that correctly? Is that confusing? I hope I said that kind of somewhat. Yeah, so it's a little bit weird with how that works, but what happens is if they land on the same round, on any of these rounds, now these are both on round 2 and this one's on round 3, so it might not matter at this point, but it does sometimes matter, I think, too, if you get stunned or silenced, right? That's a whole nother thing. It pushes abilities, right? So that can be a weird one sometimes, but I don't want to get too crazy into that because we're just talking about the character himself. So Jethros, to finish it up, the video, what would you recommend in order of what they should spend their points in first for PvP? We're not talking about tile taking, PvP.
I would do Thrain's Guards first.
1, okay.
And then I would do Arid Loon Expedition second.
Okay, all right.
And then I would max out defensive stance.
Okay, 3, all right.
Then I put the points into Durin's Blood.
Okay. To max?
And then just enough to gain access to the skills.
Okay.
So that you can get them in the right order, and then I would distribute them evenly until I'm out of points.
Into Whirlwind, into defensive stance, or defensive stance
between Whirlwind and All In. Defensive stance, I would probably just go ahead and have it maxed out, since Thrain's Guards will already be maxed out anyway.
All right, that's the big one that I think people want to know. So 1, max this out. This one, max it out. Not do there. Then go over here, max that defensive stance with your points. Then go ahead and drop 1 or 2 points in here. Open it up. Then start distributing your points between these 3. But make sure.
Much I would do that. If you don't have very many points left over, you would consider maybe doing the parry instead.
Parry down here.
I think parry before you do Durin's Blood. If you only had like 7 points left over, don't even really bother with Durin's Blood and just do parry.
All right,
but
so
once
just
you
get
have
these
like,
1 or 2
let's
points
say you have 15 points after you max out Drain's Guards, max out Heirloom, max out defensive stance, then I would just start doing Durin's Blood.
All right, then just start doing Durin's Blood. Yeah. And then let's say they have an absurd amount of points, and they're like rank 15, and they're level 50. Then after they finish putting some finishing parry up, let's say O's are finishing, then they could think about tossing some points into firing formation, right? And well prepared.
Right, I would do firing formation before well prepared. Well prepared in general is never felt like a great skill on any commander I've ever used. And
maybe where would they put in if they were thinking they want to put 2 points in this to get 1 point in relief for their cleanse?
I would do that before starting to put points into Durin's Blood
So Thrain's Guard into Erdluin Expedition, try to get those max, then try to max out defensive stance, and then put 2 points in this 1 point in relief. Then they could think about putting points in the Durin's Blood into these 2 weapons. Then at that point, let's say they still had points, then they would think about doing parry into firing formation into well prepared, right? Did I follow that?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I think that's what you. Yeah, I tried to listen.
That sounds like respect 25 to me.
Yeah, exactly. That would be an absurd build, and I think people at that point should know how to do this anyway. But anyway, that's hypothetical for all of us out here who don't have respect 25. My respect is like 6 on this guy or something. But yeah, so anyway, that's really good. And then one last thing to just finish up, items then again, for PvP, or let's say you're someone that just has purple items like Jethros already explained. Just look for the purple items that, give you might, give your army defense. Again, Warhammer is going to be great for this guy because it more defensive things, right, as well as giving him damage. If you're going to be putting points in the Durin's Blood later, then you got to think of defensive things like maybe think about something like this. Quilted armor for focus reduction, or maybe think about the evasion. This is Shroud is really good for fighting people who do early damage, or also for things like tiles that do early damage. It helps your units not die as fast. I really like that for early tile taking. And then what's the other one, Jethros? That the fire reduction one, right? What is that one called?
Yeah, the superior Herebark or whatever it's called.
I thought I had that one. Oh, here it is. Yeah. That could also be a good one.
that thing's pretty good because he actually is one of the few dwarves that doesn't have the fire resistance when maxing out the Lonely Mountain.
So if you're fighting a lot of fire enemy commanders, use a lot of fire units or fire damage, this could be a good one to add on there because it's more defense. Again, we're getting a little bit crazy on the defense. And I'd also recommend, I think either of these ones would be good because this one gives more survivability, right? HP, gives him focus, which he does get if you're going to use that cleanse, right? And then more might, and then he has more healing. Or you could do something like this, right? Give yourself more speed in your army and more focus for his heals. But I still think the best one is his actual item if you can get him rank 10. That thing is so good. Like, Jethros, like, that thing is, this item, if you're doing his build, I feel like I'm going to try to get him there because I really think even level 1 with only 1 or 2 upgrades will make this just so strong. I think 2 upgrades would make this thing plenty worth using, even without refining it. It's super good. So yeah,
you want to get it up to 3-star, right? To get it to double the base stats.
Yes, correct.
If you 3-star an item, it doubles the base stats, and if you 5-star an item, then it triples the base stats.
Yeah. So, and I mean, that's not really too much of a sacrifice since he is a level 2. That means you're using purple accessories to upgrade it. So, not impossible to get him up super, super hard, right? So that could be a good one.
Really? Does it work like that?
He's level 2, right? Oh wait, or do all special ones?
They all require gold ones.
They all require gold. You're right. I'm correct. I take that back.
Just want to make sure I wasn't missing some really important information right there.
You are correct, because even my Gimli, he requires gold, and he's level 2. I take that back. Excuse me. I was just thinking regular upgrades. I forgot that is something hard. So I'd have to use gold. I'd have to use 2 gold, right, to upgrade that item.
Gold accessories to upgrade it, yeah.
So I would need to use 2.
Yeah, you would need to use
like
4,
this.
Actually.
4 to get it to level 3.
Yeah, to get it to 3-star, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it would be a sacrifice, so I wouldn't really recommend it to people unless you really, really care about using him. Like, he's going to be one of your main commanders. Otherwise, you could also get something like this. If you have this item and level this once or twice, like, this is a good one, too, for him. Focus,
pretty cool item.
Defense, and recovery. Again, if you're using the trait tree early, but again, I think probably just a basic defensive item that's purple could also be just fine. think you can just stick with, you know, like I showed you guys the twine. I think Athelian rope would be plenty good for him. But again, people could test and whatever. Is there anything else you want to add about him, Jethros, before we finish up the video?
I think we've exhausted a lot of options. So.
I think people will understand at this point. Hey, we kept it under 25 minutes right now. All right. Anyway, you guys have a great day in Middle Earth. Thanks for joining us. We'll be doing more. There's my little Patreon. It's behind. Oh no, it's behind us. There it is. Thanks to my Patreons. And subscribe is gonna be right there if we earned it. Next episode's up there on the left for RiseToWar, and Locher Tales over there. So you guys have a great day in Middle Earth, and we'll see you all in the next episode of Voice of the Rings. And the next episode is gonna have a lot more. We're gonna talk about one of Jethro's heroes. See you then.